Hey, Roger, it's great to have you on the podcast. How are you? And may I ask where you're calling in from?
Well, thanks, James. It's great to be here. And I'm currently sitting in the basement of my house in Toronto, in Canada. And it's a lovely day outside. And yeah, just happy to be part of this conversation.
Excellent. Well, no, it's a real pleasure to have you on, and thank you very much for giving us some of your time today. Before we jump in and talk about a few specific projects, I was just wondering, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your kind of scholarly work. What are your research interests, and can you just tell us a little bit about what you teach?
Well, thanks. My background is in education. I started out with a first career in school teaching, and that was a great experience, but of course it raised many questions in my mind, and I'm a curious person, and so then it led me to the dark path of academia, where I was able to have the luxury of exploring these questions, some of these questions in greater depth. One of the issues that came up out of my school teaching career had to do with the question of lifelong involvement in music, and like, why do we teach these things? Because it's great to teach it in school for a particular reason, under the sort of the banner of learning, but then learning to what end? And that, it took me a little while, but eventually it led me to the field of leisure studies. And so that's kind of where I've parked myself primarily now. I'm interested in connections between music and education and lifelong involvement, and by leisure, or leisure, as we would say in the UK, as I know quite well. And I do know also from colleagues in the UK that sometimes the word leisure can be polarizing, to the extent that there are some class-based associations, especially in the way that the word was used in particular contexts. My own sort of intellectual conception of the word derives from like ancient Greek thought, the word schole, where education and leisure were the same thing. And so for me, it made perfect sense that music, in its non-vocational sense, its non-professional sense, should be something that people engage with out of a sense of self-care, self-worth, and especially in the way that it helps us in a community sense become closer to one another and engage. So I've most of my work now involves music and leisure, or leisure, which can take a lot of different forms. I'm currently exploring pipe bands, like Scottish pipe bands, although in Canada it would be Canadian pipe bands. And so that's just one example of people who are, as they say, crazy passionate about what they do, but they don't do it as their main occupation, if that makes sense.
Well, it sounds like your current work is a real amalgamation of a few different disciplines and a few different kind of paths and careers throughout your life. Fascinating stuff. Is it also, sounds like it's quite transatlantic, in the sense that there's a lot of discourse taking place in North America and in the UK. Is it quite an international sort of set of disciplines and topics that you engage with, or would you say it's more kind of stuck between those kind of the Canada, UK, US?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and it's a complicated question, because in about 10 days from now, I'll be in Finland for the conference, the International Society for Music Education. And of course, it by its virtue of its name, it claims to be international, and it is. But like so many aspects of academia, there is a decidedly sort of global north western sort of slant to it, and that is in some ways, well, people can draw their own conclusions. I mean, it's indicative in some ways of our world, but certainly in the field of community music or music education, it tends to be global north and western centric. So yeah, to the extent that my own work is probably rooted there, that's a fair point. But as concerns maybe larger issues of well-being in relation to leisure, every society supposedly has some conception of leisure or leisure, even if they don't use that specific word. And so there, it's just kind of part of the human experience that we do stuff that, is part of obligations, and then we have stuff that's not strictly obligated, and so therefore, in that sense, one might think that it's kind of universal, even if it takes particular forms.
Yeah. Okay. And speaking of leisure and music, do you connect the two in your own personal life? Are you a musician yourself?
Well, yes. I mean, my origins were as a saxophone player, and I've done that lots throughout my life. Used to do it various levels of intensity, both sort of for fun and also in a sort of professional sense. But academia, in terms of the job that I have, is primarily sitting in front of a computer, and it doesn't allow for a lot of time of high level practicing and whatnot. And then a few years ago, I had a colleague who reached out to me during the pandemic wanting to know if I wanted to learn to play Irish flute, which I had never done anything like that before. And I was going to say no, and then I sort of, I don't know, I guessed correctly that lockdowns might go on for more
Yeah.
than like a month, and so I'm glad I said yes. And so I ended up from that experience. I learned the Irish flute, and I bought a couple of Irish flutes, and I have this sitting beside me because I was at a session last night, just in downtown Toronto, playing Irish flute, like fiddle music, in a session, and so I'm happy to have started to reclaim that part of my life in terms of trying to not necessarily walk the talk in that sense, but rather I love doing this. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to now be able to get back out there and make music for fun, as opposed to my career.
Well, Roger, to be honest, I think during the pandemic, most people learned that they had an alcohol problem, maybe some problems with their marriage. So learning learning a new instrument and reconnecting with your musical past, I think, is a definite good use of lockdown time spent. Awesome. Well, I'm not actually particularly familiar with the instrument, but I assume if you've come from either a brass or a woodwind background, it's kind of follows like.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And it sounds like you're slightly connecting with the Celtic music as well, through your research, and then of course through the playing now as well. So it's kind of nice when things kind of round together, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it is nice for those things to kind of come full circle. It's very different from the jazz and classical playing that I used to do, but I
Yeah.
mean, I love learning new things, and so it's fun.
Do you see? Well, I was going to ask, yeah, like, is there a particular genre that you enjoy to play? But it sounds like you've come from a jazz, classical kind of like traditional background in a sense, and then now through happenstance, you've picked up this more kind of Celtic, Irish kind of flute thing. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a participatory thing, right? So I mean, and of course there are levels of that, but the session that I've been going to lately, on Thursday nights, it's very much in a kind of participatory ethos, which is like welcoming, and yes, come join us, let's play. And I really like that. I think it really kind of embodies the whole spirit of it. And I haven't gotten to know what everybody does around the circle and whatnot, but I have encountered people that are like electricians and teachers, and people do all sorts of things, and yet they love to go out on a Thursday night and play Irish traditional music. I mean, that's fun.
Well, I want to jump back into a more serious question that you alluded to earlier, really. And it's kind of, I wanted to ask you, why do you feel it's so important, both for young people to learn and experience music in an educational environment in that capacity? And then also based on your research, why it's so important for us to continue that in lifelong learning situations and outside of formal education as well. Yeah, just a couple of questions there. Just great to get your perspective on those kinds of things.
Well, we could go on for a couple of hours on those.
Yeah, sure, that might be. In a nutshell.
They're deep questions. I guess maybe on a simple answer, and I don't want this to sound too trite or even sort of Luddite in the sense, music, as we know historically, has fulfilled a lot of different functions, but certainly one of them has been a social function in bringing people together. And it's no secret that in our current technological state, screens and devices are consuming so much of our time and attention. And if music has always been important, I mean, it's been around since people have been walking the earth, but it seems to me that it's become the social sense of music making has become the importance of that has become even greater today, as there is this sort of weird sense. And I'm not in media studies or fields that study this per se, but in the sense that social media and other social connections have created this sort of dualistic split where we're both more connected and more disconnected at the same time. The idea that we can get away from a screen and make music together, even though I was really tired last night, I still went out and I came home, and it's late by the time I'm getting home, but it took me a while to get to sleep because I was just on such a high of just being able to make music with other people. It was just such a life affirming kind of thing. And that's really, when we think about the value of why we do this or why we study it or want to promote this, and that ties into the field of community music, which is very much about trying to promote and generate and spur on more musical activity for purposes, well, multiple purposes, some of which are addressed more, not necessarily, I don't want to put it in a deficit framework, but certainly addressing underserved or people in more challenging circumstances, doing something, doing good in that sense, but also music in the sense of just general wellness, overall wellness for all people. It really doesn't matter what your circumstance. Loneliness is not a condition that is specific to, I mean, it cuts across everything. It cuts across all ages, all demographics, all socioeconomic classes. All people experience or can experience loneliness, and music is one of those things that I didn't feel lonely last night, I'll tell you that.
No. Well, I think that's a lovely example of why music is so important in all these different contexts. You've also nicely kind of prefigured my next series of questions, which of course are looking at the journal Community Music, which you're of course the editor of, so one of Intellect's flagship journal titles. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Journal of Community Music, which, just for anyone who's interested, it is indexed in the Web of Science. It's on Scopus, among many other of those top important indexes for people who are looking out for that kind of information. But can you tell us a little bit about the journal and its history more generally? How did you get involved with it? How long has it been going? What's the kind of aims and scope of the publication? Give us a bit of an overview. That'd be fantastic.
Well, sure. And, people listening, you can go online and find out some of the sort of official information about aims and scope as it's listed on the website. But in answer to the question, I mean, the journal has its origins in and around sort of 2006, 2007, 2008. That's kind of this germinal period. And also, I should just put in a little bit of a plug for a new podcast series that I'm involved with through the Community Music Learning YouTube channel called IJCM Conversations. And I mentioned that in part because one of the people that we interview in one of the early episodes is Lee Higgins, one of the co-founding editors of the journal. And for people who may not know, Lee and I ended up being hired at the same time at Boston University in 2009. And so this was right around the time that the journal had just first started. And as a result, Lee and I quickly became friends, hired at the same time, same institution, and had many conversations. And so we had many good back and forths about the UK tradition of community music and how that arose out of the community arts movement and whatnot, out of the 1970s and 80s, and how that led him into his own work in community music and as an animateur, one of the terms that they used at the time, and how that led him increasingly, through the International Society for Music Education's Community Music Activity Commission work, a group of people that was heavily involved. And he, at the time, and of course he describes this in better detail in the podcast when we interview him. But he had some conversations with a music education scholar, David Elliott, at the time, and so the two of them put their heads together, and they started at first sort of an online version of the journal. And so there were some articles that appeared, but then he had a fortuitous meeting with, and you'll have to remind me of the specific person at Intellect, the owner, remind me.
With Masood Yazdani, the late Masood Yazdani. Yeah, that's correct.
Yes, exactly.
I remember I actually met with Lee in Boston years and years back as well. And Masood and I did a workshop on publishing with Intellect as we were kind of really taking the journal program to the next level, which was one of Masood's grand visions for the business. But unfortunately, Masood has passed, but he's very, very much with us in legacy. And his wife still owns the company. So that's what it would have been, I think.
Yes, it was, absolutely. And that's, and as a result, conversations happened, and there was an agreement that, okay, I think the time has come to turn this into a scholarly journal, because Lee, his life had been largely in the field of community music, and he recognized that in order for it to sort of progress and become more than sort of its kind of UK origin concept. Not that it was exclusively there, but obviously parts of Ireland. But the particular conception started there, even though there were many community music discourses operating in other parts of the world. But he did have the vision to try to actualize this through Intellect and through the creation of this journal. And certainly he was very much sold on the vision that Intellect had in terms of this, not because there is a certain tension of a field like community music that appeals to a sort of grassroots cultural democracy kind of ethos existing behind a paywall journal. And that's there's always going to be that tension. But he also recognized, I think history has proven him correct, that without taking this step, there was really no way for the field to advance and really sort of scale up in its impact on the world. So I think full credit to Lee on that. And now we are currently in volume 17. So it's been a wonderful journey. So it's full credit to Intellect for helping to make this happen, and to Lee for having the vision to help get this started. And as you know, he ran it for 14 years before I came on a couple of years ago.
Well, yeah, and congratulations to yourself as well for taking the torch. And like I said, it was great to see this vision of Lee and Masood's come full circle now. Like I say, it is one of our flagship titles, and we're a very well perceived and respected publication in the field and beyond across the arts and humanities. And I think it's a really tremendous publication, and it's great to see what you're doing with it now at the helm. For a few people out there, other than the excellent rankings the journal has, perhaps you could tell us a few of the things that make it a little bit different from your perspective. How does it maybe set itself apart from the competition, or just from your average kind of run-of-the-mill journal? Why is it so exciting? Why would people want to publish with us?
Well, I think one of the things that attracted Lee was the idea that the business model that Intellect had was to basically take an established journal and use that to fund the creation of new journals, so that it wasn't so much an exploitive thing, but a generative thing, where the International Journal of Community Music has since spawned, and forgive me for not getting the correct title, but the Journal of Early Childhood Music. What's the correct title?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yes,
that's right. Yeah.
Okay, and of course the Journal of Popular Music Education. And these are journals that have come about thanks to the beginning of the International Journal of Community Music. And I think one of the things that attracted Lee as well was a few things. I mean, one being the willingness to, for example, publish color photographs, which it was like, I think what he liked was the idea that there was a true investment in the content and the belief in the area. And to this day, there isn't really direct competition. There is a student community journal run out of York St. John that Lee oversees or instigated. But it is the International Journal of Community Music really is the one and only scholarly community music journal, and I think it's been able to do that because of the fact that it has managed to, I think, in my opinion, walk the line between practitioners and scholars. Sometimes there's a tension there, and the fact that from the inception, the journal would publish project reports, and support less experienced authors. So, a lot of people who may be community music practitioners are brilliant musicians, brilliant music leaders, brilliant facilitators, but maybe academic writing is not what they do. And so the journal has been very supportive of less experienced authors in making sure that their voices are heard. And so I think one of the reasons why the journal has been successful has been its support system, while simultaneously managing to uphold the kind of scholarly standards and expectations that we associate with peer-reviewed scholarship. Because if it's a fine line to walk, but if you want to be credible, you can't just be putting out anything. It does need to uphold a certain standard, and I think the journal has managed to do that.
It certainly has, and I feel like you're in the running for my job here, because that's a really beautiful encapsulation of kind of some of the different elements that we hold really important to us at Intellect. Trying to find that balance between scholarship and practice, and trying to engender interdisciplinarity, and to foster conversations and communication between different disciplines, different geographical areas, and things like that. So I think, you've kind of encapsulated a lot of what the company's about, as well as the types of journals that we like to produce and work with. And I think we should also give you a bit of a shout out, in the sense that we're now servicing lots of different communities. I think based on the fact that you guys, you took the risk with us, and that you showed that we could establish this publication, those years ago. Now we have, the Diamond Open Access Journal, for an underserved community, global hip hop studies, focusing on, again, a lot of community music stuff is part of that, although interdisciplinarity is more important to that one. And then, of course, punk and post-punk, and then metal music studies, to go along with, early childhood development music, and various other publications that we've already mentioned. So I think it really was kind of like a genesis point for us, and really opened our eyes to like community-based musics internationally. So it really has like quite an important sort of developmental piece for a lot of our other publications too. So I think we should always pay compliments where they're due, and I think you all deserve that, that's for sure. Well, thank you again for like kind of going over some of the aims and the scopes, and some of these other bits and pieces about what make the journal different, and its history. How about maybe any forthcoming issues? Do you have any special topics on the horizon? Any special CFPs, or are you just kind of out for just general content at the moment?
Well, one of the things that, again, I do have to give Lee full credit. One of the things that he started doing relatively early on was to promote the idea of special issues. And he did that for a couple of reasons, but one of which was that it was really an opportunity to galvanize interest around specific topics. And so I still remember sitting at a pub in Boston when Lee approached me about a special issue on music and leisure, and that one came out, I think, in 2013, a while ago now. But that was just an early example. We've had issues on music in prison contexts or music therapy contexts, and a whole raft of topics, and we continue to try to make sure that we have at least one special issue a year on average, in order to balance that out. Last year we had one on street musicians, our buskers, and we just had 17.1, volume 17, number 1, that just came out recently, is on community music in Italy. And some of these geographic focuses, we've had Germany, we've had the Nordic countries. They can be interesting because as the editorial introduction to the Italian issue points out, community music is not a term that is used in Italy, and so it doesn't really have any currency. So how do we, the practice is there. Obviously, every country is going to have some form of community music making, but how do we talk about this? And later this year, Dave Camlin and his associates are doing a special issue on music and sustainability, which we are really excited about. That one's just about to go into production in a month or two. Upcoming, I think in 2026, we have we're planning a special Indigenous issue, indigeneity and decolonization. So we're always trying to use special issues to galvanize interest around particular topics that are relevant to the field of community music.
Excellent. And just, any top tips perhaps for an emerging scholar who's looking to place their first article and they happen upon the Journal of Community Music, and anything that you would advise from your experience?
Well, it's a great question, and I do appreciate that question, because it's one that I think maybe doesn't just apply to this journal, but probably to authors submitting to any journal. But for this one, especially in the academic realm where everything is cliched about publish or perish, there's a temptation to just sort of throw anything out there. And it's really a bad strategy, because, publishing is really, people can have different ideas, but I certainly have always conceived of it as participating in an ongoing conversation. And if you're going to participate in a conversation, you should probably know what people are thinking about or talking about. So you don't just arrive at a party and just start talking about anything. You listen for a bit, and what are these people talking about, and how can I be part of that conversation? So, sometimes we do get manuscripts from people who clearly have never read the journal. I mean, why would you want to be part of a conversation with people that you have nothing in common with? I mean, you want to first of all read the journal's web pages and learn what the instructions are. There's always, every journal is going to have some sort of advice for authors, advice to authors, submission to authors, and learn that. But then it's also helpful to have at least read the journal so that you know what the ongoing conversations are, because in the case of community music, it's not completely unique in this way, but it's an interdisciplinary field, but that doesn't mean it's anything. And so, like anything else, there's always going to be some sort of boundary, even if it's a loose boundary, between what it is and what it isn't. And so it can be many, many things, but many doesn't mean just anything. And so sometimes we get, we do get quite a number of submissions that we just deem out of scope, which is, this has nothing to do with the field of community music. So if you're an author that you're looking to publish, try and find a little bit of what's going on, learn, what the general, I mean, you can do this in a number of ways. I mean, even just reading abstracts and looking at keywords, it will give you a sense of, oh, these are the kinds of conversations that happen in community music. And if community music didn't have something that made it distinctive, well, then it would have no reason to exist. But it exists because it addresses a particular kind of set of interests, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and one that people should definitely open their ears to. I feel like often a lot of emerging scholars as well these days, they are under a lot of duress to publish either open access or to publish in a Q1, Q2, top ranking journal, but then they're fundamentally working on something quite niche and specific, where their home would be better in a more niche, bespoke publication, but they're under these increasing pressures to aim for the top, as it were. Often, that journal isn't necessarily the right journal or necessarily the most impactful for your particular research. Maybe it doesn't have impact sort of beyond the academy in the real world where perhaps it needs to have that impact depending on what you're writing on, especially if it's more community-based education, art, music, things of that nature. So I feel like increasingly I hear from editors that things are being rejected out of scope because fundamentally people are looking more at the rank and these key metrics than they are the actual aim and scope, or going back and reading the abstracts of previously published articles and getting a real, feel for how the journal has developed over its lineage and how it, what kinds of conversations are going to be relevant. Either that, or perhaps they read one specialist issue one time 10 years ago, and now they're like, oh yeah, it's all about that for sure.
No, and that is great advice. And I mean, we don't need to necessarily go down the rabbit hole of neoliberalism and the way that institutions are pressuring scholars. And I'm very sympathetic to that, because it is a very real problem, and it's a problem that is generating just, I think, not to put it in true dramatic terms, but it's generating so much misery and frustration for people. And if people can somehow see themselves through, I mean, the advice that I tend to always give is that you do have to ultimately do a lot of soul searching, which doesn't mean that I'm ignoring the practicalities of the tenure expectations in many institutions. But yeah, I think, as you said, you want to find yourself within a community of people who with shared interests. And going after a top ranked journal just because it has like the highest impact factor ranking according to some algorithm, it can be really wrong-headed. If I mean, to take a silly example, I mean, I could speak to a room of 10 people in the field of community music, and we have this rich generative discussion, and then those 10 people, they go back and they go, or I can speak to a room of 10,000 chemists and they don't care what I'm talking about, and so it has zero impact. And yes, I can say that I spoke to 10,000 people, but it had zero impact. And so I always encourage people to think about trying to participate in a community of scholars where you forge deeper relationships with other like-minded scholars, rather than just trying to play the neoliberal game, because that ultimately will, I mean, first of all, I think it's probably not very rewarding on a personal level or professional level, but it's also, I think, wrong-headed, because it will ultimately come back to bite you, because at the end of the day, so if you haven't ever established a bunch of like meaningful relationships with like-minded scholars, when you need to have those tenure letters, who's going to write for you? Because nobody knows your work. You've just published in a bunch of generic, supposedly high-ranking journals that nobody cares about who you are. They can't recognize your name. They've never really cared about what you write about. So I definitely think that specialized journals are a much, in many cases, a much smarter way to go.
I totally agree with you, and I mean, again, we don't get on the neoliberal, the wormhole there. But again, they're often run in more ethical ways as well, and have opportunities to be more ethical, because they're not constantly, the teams aren't constantly focusing on just data. It's also about connecting real world connections with people, developing the community in the field, working with people, connecting with a conference, and then utilizing revenue to encourage people from countries to come and join and make it international, and create bursaries, and all these things come from there, so no, I'm a staunch advocate of that, for sure. And that's been my experiences, that often if people work with more specialist publications, in the long run, it works out in their favor across the board anyway. Well, that was really good advice, and it's been great to talk to you about the journal. Like I said, I think it's a tremendous publication, and I'd advocate for everyone to go out there and take a look at it. If people do go to intellectdiscover.com, or if they go to www.intellectbooks.com, both platforms, you can access the journal. And of course, the journal is hybrid, so some of it's behind a paywall, but also you can definitely download one free issue, and then there's a number of open access articles available too, and we will make things freely available either for periods or just make them open as funding becomes available, or because to commemorate special issues or things going on in the wider world as well. So do take a look at intellectbooks.com. Intellect's Journal of Community Music, with Roger Mantie at the head as a lead editor for the moment, but a great team and a great editorial board behind that one, and a rich history and legacy. But not letting you go yet. We have a few final questions, quick time questions, which some of our viewers may become more aware of these days. So just looking for some short, snappy answers from you. I've got a few questions, so I'm just going to run over them if that's okay with you.
Sure.
All right, Roger. So what's your favorite city and why?
Well, I should probably say Toronto because that's where I live. And Toronto is very cool. Although my older daughter goes to university in Montreal, and Montreal is a very, very cool city. And the International Society for Music Education conference will be there in 2026. And so I hope other people will visit it as well, because Montreal has a really particular energy that is it's fun to be in, especially in the summer.
Yeah, I totally agree with that there. I've been, unfortunately, far too many times in the winter, but Montreal is a wonderful city. Great food, great music, great culture, lovely small kind of like sort of Chinatown there. And of course, if you're in Toronto or Montreal, neither are too far from each other, especially not in Canadian terms, so you can do a double whammy there. So I'd always advocate that too. Yeah, good answer, and you've stuck to Canadian, so I'm sure some of your colleagues are going to let you get away with that one. How about, well, you talked about coming from different, I guess, different genres of music, but do you have a favorite composer?
Oh, that is such a tough question. And I don't want to deflect on that, but it's just what's so difficult for me is that I really just love so much music. There's not very much music that I don't love. And so I love lots of composers. I love lots of bands. I love lots of artists. I love lots of different kinds of musicians. Yeah, I mean,
Is there anyone that you're currently listening to of any genre that you'd like maybe recommend to just a good album or a good composition you've been listening to recently?
Oh, here's my dirty little secret. I go to the gym and I go to just I put on my Apple Music, and they just have all of these playlists, and I literally just, it's not completely random, but I love discovery, and so I just pick a playlist for the day, and no matter what the genre is, and so some days it's like Apple classical, some days it's jazz, some days it's hip hop, some days it's sometimes I don't listen to the country one as much, but sometimes I'll do that one. I mean, it's wonderful, and I'm blanking. I'm feeling badly because there was a jazz artist, this young woman that I wish I had it handy so I could tell you, because it's stunning how beautiful it is. But I don't know. I love exploration, and while we could go down another rabbit hole and talk about how streaming has destroyed the music industry, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing I would say is that we've never had such access to discovery, and I'll say, like, some things that's happening in the sort of professional folk traditional music scene, like, and I don't mean to use the word world music, but some of the imagination that's going on there is just there. And I'm blanking on the name of the band. It's something like Sven or something like that. But this tune, like Masochsen as an example, it's like, it's fun, it's great, so I love anything that is creative and shows a kind of world awareness, if that makes sense. How's that for an answer?
That's a good answer. I like that. I'll certainly take that. Yeah, I think also I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and looks for the silver linings wherever possible. These days, anyway, I'm not immune to catastrophe and apocalyptic mindset either. But for today, at least, I'm feeling like silver linings. And yes, we could decry Spotify, Apple Music, all of the algorithms and all of the stuff that goes along with that negative. But you can also moderate your own behavior using your own ethics and your own decision making, right?
Exactly.
And I think, whatever your platform of choice is, yes, they might be ripping off artists, but I've encountered so many musicians and artists I never would have necessarily encountered And then I then can go out and see them live, buy a T-shirt, support them in other ways, or of course, being a bit more old school. And I know it's come back around. There's no shortage of independent record stores out there these days, especially in North America. I can obviously speak to Tucson, where I'm based, and New York, where I lived prior to this. I'm sure it's the same in Toronto, from my understanding. You can go in and buy the vinyl, or use, maybe it's a hip hop artist. Maybe you could listen to the samples, and then maybe you go back and you encounter something rare or interesting that way. So no, I think the discovery element is well worth highlighting. And if we're looking for a silver lining and we want to be glass half full people, I think, for me personally, I've encountered so much music I never would have, encountered, and I probably have put more money into supporting those acts, especially if they're from more of a niche subgenre or a region that maybe doesn't get the
exactly.
financial, so
yes.
Exactly. Anyway, so no, good answer. Well, let's stay with the music stuff for a minute though, because also tangible and tactile albums, I'm speaking to a man of a certain age, so you'll remember going and purchasing CDs and vinyl and tapes and as physical objects. Now, were there any particular artwork or sleeves, liner notes, anything that you kind of think about from childhood? For me, it's like maybe a couple of random ones. OK Computer, I remember fawning over that, but then also getting Wu-Tang Forever and just being taken aback by this double CD with this massive booklet with all these these images and song lyrics. So yeah, I mean, those two are ones that always come back to me. But are there any be album artworks or sleeve liner notes that you particularly remember or love going back to?
Well, I mean, again, you're sort of bringing back some nostalgia things here, and upstairs, on our main floor, we do have a few hundred albums, like vinyl, and kind of a very eclectic mix. Though this is not like a collector. One of my colleagues at the university is a true audiophile who has like a massive collection of like the best of the best, like thousands, and so I'm not like that, but I just love the mode of discovery, and I just while it's not necessarily fashionable to point to a band like Spyro Gyra, a group from the 1980s, but they had a great album cover, and it was just like I had to have it. I had to have that just because it was so attractive. And then, Santana has their beautiful album cover as well. But then more recently, sometimes when we go out and purchase vinyl or go out, to some of the used places, you discover it's such a great cultural studies kind of approach where you sort of think, okay, what were they thinking? I mean, there's this, and I've got it, and I won't bring it down to show you because it's somewhat embarrassing, but there's this album cover by a jazz flute player, Herbie Mann, and it is like the most bizarre thing. It's got velvet in it, and it's like,
nice.
but it's him, like, but with no clothes up top, and it looks very creepy, and so, no offense to Herbie Mann fans, but I just love that is one thing that I am a little bit nostalgic about, is the kind of loss, and it's nice that vinyl is coming back, but not quite in the same way. And obviously digital, we don't have the artwork, and that the thing that made it kind of not commodity in the bad sense, but commodity in the good sense.
It's funny because I just filled my suitcase coming back from the UK on a business trip, visiting some conferences and things. And, I can only fit maybe 5 vinyl LPs wrapped in like cardboard and stuff in my suitcase that I brought back over with me. And it's funny because I'm doing that each time that I take an actual suitcase with me. And I haven't actually got a working record player here. But my vinyl collection's back in the UK with my mum and dad. And I'm slowly creating a new one, and then bringing back all the classics. They're that valuable to me. They're one of the few things that, one, I won't like get rid of them, and two, I'm not too keen on shipping them. One, because of the cost, but two, because of the potential for them to get destroyed, which is common I do here. So it's like slowly bringing them over, like
that is a great story.
Albums at a time. But it's just funny because it's a real pain, and I can't even listen to them. But as artifacts, how tangible and tactile they are, which I think is why I wanted to ask you that question. But go on, what were you going to say?
No, I'm very I'm so impressed on multiple levels, and all I'll say is that while our vinyl collection has grown a little bit in the last few years that we've lived in Toronto, we've moved around a lot, and so our vinyl collection has we have shipped it and boxed it up and traveled from Winnipeg to Toronto to Boston to Phoenix back to Toronto, and so our vinyl has many thousands and thousands of miles, kilometers on it. We've boxed and unboxed it many times, and you're right, it is heavy.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's like, of course, the books and vinyl are two of the few things that, again, probably show my sort of age and generation, but like that I really have, trouble. I got rid of 6-7 boxes of books when I went back to the UK last time, but there's still about another 6-7 boxes that I'll never get rid of. And if I have to carry them over one book at a time, I'll do it. But I haven't started on the books yet. So far, it's just been the vinyl that I've been focusing my attention and my back on. Let's mix it up a little bit. Now, you're a writer, you're an editor, and a musician, so I'm sure you get hungry at your desk from time to time, and you're having a blood sugar meltdown, which is inducing writer's block. What's your go-to snack going to be?
I mean, it's horrible. I try to stay healthy for the most part, but I'm sort of a sucker for the salty snacks. So any sort of chip or any sort of thing like that, crisps, as you say,
Yeah.
any sort of thing like that, I just can't resist. Anything with salt.
Well, I think you've been quite restrained. I thought you were going to go full Canadian and say, like a side order of poutine. That's going to put you into a coma of a different kind, I think.
No, then the problem is there's no returning to work after that.
No, definitely not. And I mean, I can say that because being British and Intellect's headquarters is in Bristol, which is near, of course, to Wales. And chips, cheese and gravy is our equivalent of poutine, you could say, and the Welsh do a particularly good job of recreating that, especially down Chippy Alley in Cardiff. So, but it's a good way to end the night, perhaps not start the night, especially if you want to play,
exactly
flute, for example.
Yeah, that's right.
Have elaborate conversations around jazz flute musings type thing. So,
no, you have to show some restraint sometimes, but.
And are you reading anything good at the moment? Anything interesting? It could be fiction, it could be scholarship related. What's piquing your interest?
Well, it's always a good question, and it's back as we circle back to the question about leisure or leisure. I find one of the ironies that because I do so much reading for my job, just I have to that's constitutes the lion's share of what I do. Sometimes I don't. I fell out of sort of reading for fun because, of course, if you do it's kind of like when I was a school music teacher. Quite honestly, after being in sound all day, the last thing I wanted to do was make music at the end of the day. And so now it's kind of nice that I don't do that. So now making music is fun. And so sometimes I haven't been reading as much, but every once in a while, my older daughter will. She reads voraciously, and so she gave me there's a book of essays by Margaret Atwood, who's a Canadian author. Some people probably have heard of her, so I'm just starting to dig into that, and I'm looking forward to just reading something that is not work for a change, because work as an academic, you read a lot.
Well, as they say, a busman's holiday or a bus driver's holiday, right?
Yes.
I totally understand. Well, being from the publisher's perspective as well, although I'm more focusing on marketing these days, you still read a lot of manuscripts, and so I can understand, coming home and then being like, I'll just delve into, some Freud or some Einstein or some Foucault or something. You're like, nah, maybe not.
Exactly.
I think Atwood is a great example, and for anyone who hasn't read any Margaret Atwood, definitely that's a good place to start if you want to kind of read something interesting and engaging that's also going to be a bit of a page turner. I think that's a great place to start. Okay, and then just a couple more questions. Do you, again, back to music, any epic performances that you can remember from your life? No, it could be one that you played yourself, or a gig, a concert that you have attended. Anything groundbreaking, life-changing?
Well, I mean, I did manage to hear Miles Davis, back, I'm not old enough to have been around some of the kind of classic jazz acts and whatnot, but in more recent times, although this was probably like 10 years ago or something. So my daughter was going to school with somebody whose father had a hearing impairment, and and so this is when we were in Boston, and so part of the American with Disabilities Act in the U.S. is that any concert venue has to make accommodations, and because this person was a true music lover, just loved going to concerts in spite of the hearing impairment. And so the deal is that you contact the venue in advance, and they have to provide like an interpreter, and they have created space, but they also, because of course they understand that you're probably not just going to go by yourself. They have to make allowance for guests who might be with you, and I think there's a limit, like 2 or whatever. But it's not like you can bring 50 people with you. But so anyway,
tickets outside.
Well, so he invited my wife and I to attend a concert of the Jay Giles Band and Aerosmith at Fenway Park in Boston. So Fenway being the famous historic baseball stadium, and those are 2 bands that are from Boston. And so, but the significance being that it's not that we just saw them; we were right at the foot of the stage, and like we were right there. And so the experience of seeing 2 bands, certainly Aerosmith, and seeing that just like feet from your face was it sort of had a rather I'm not a massive concert goer, but I have been, because I'm older now, I have managed to see a lot of acts. But that was certainly just the impact of seeing that because we were in Boston. You're at Fenway watching the bands, and you're that close, and like seeing like sweat, just it was just really impactful, which is probably less about the musical experience, although that was cool too. But just if you're going to go to see live music, that was certainly an epic kind of experience, I would say.
I think that's a great answer, and I can see when you have all these things coming together and unifying like that. I'm not surprised that was a good experience. Well, look, my last question then, really, we've mentioned a podcast that you've been, working on recently, which I'm hoping that we're going to be able to host through the Intellect YouTube as well. Following on this specific episode of In Conversation, there'll be a playlist for the community music podcast on our channel too. But other than the podcast, what else have you been working on recently?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, I've been doing some research on these Canadian pipe and drum bands, attending Highland Games festivals and all sorts of. I mean, it's in 2022 in the summer, I went to the World Piping Championships in Glasgow, and which was just eye-opening because I'm not Scottish and I don't have that background, but it's been a wonderful trip, just sort of learning about this amazingly intense community. And I'm also involved in another research project looking at the educational values and beliefs of music teachers. And yeah, I mean, like a lot of academics, or at least ones once you've been in it for a while, I have just a few too many irons in the fire, as it were. And so yeah, I think I'm currently working on 4 different articles and 3 different book chapters, which is not good advice to anyone, but but that's sometimes just the way it works. And it's not, it's all things I enjoy, and I'm in a privileged position because now I'm at a stage of my career where I'm doing it because I want to and not because I have to or anything like that. And so, yeah, it's all stuff I love doing. It's just, there's not enough hours in the day. So always fun.
Well, on that note, Roger, I'll let you go back to work. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on the In Conversation podcast today. It's been a real pleasure having you on. Really enjoyed our conversation. And I just highlight, of course, the Intellect's Journal of Community Music. I would urge everyone to go and check it out. As I said, there's a free issue online and there's an open call for papers. And I'm sure you can tell from this conversation that Roger and his team are very open and very collegial and a wonder to work with. So thank you again from Intellect and our whole team, celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, and definitely want to shine some light on the work that you and your colleagues are doing in the very important topic of community music. So thank you so much again for your time, Roger. It was my pleasure.
Thanks, James. Been a pleasure as well. Thanks.